Hi, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to Evoke Therapy Program's broadcast. Today is Monday, May 11th, 2020. I'm actually going to start with an announcement because I just finished our second online Finding You program, and I absolutely am in love with these. I know that there are some attendees on right now that have attended these, and I had some skepticism coming in, and I can't do something that I don't believe in. I didn't know that you could have a virtual intensive that would be as powerful as these ended up being. And I want to share with you that I'm convinced that we're going to do these long after COVID because we think there's it can appeal to people that might not be able to travel, and the cost and the overhead for us is a lot lower. So if you're interested, I think we have one spot for this weekend, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, Friday afternoon, all day Saturday and all day Sunday. I think we have one spot left, and I know that there are a couple of people that we've reached out to for that. So if you're interested in that, doing a deeper dive, doing your own work, if your child is in therapy, if your child is home, if you don't have a child with us, I would encourage you to email intensives@evoketherapy.com and somebody will reach back out to you. So I wanted to start off with that announcement because I feel so excited about that. In my book, The Audacity to Be You, there's the last chapter I talk about the myths of being human. And somebody asked me a couple of weeks ago if I would talk about those. And so tonight I'm going to take through the 12 myths of being human and the three keys to enlightenment, which is the last chapter of my book. Some of these are covered in the first book, some of these are covered in the second book, some of these I don't speak about a lot, but I think it's nice to have them in one location. I think there are so many ideas that are so pervasive in our culture, not just our culture, but other cultures that I've worked with, about things that go unchallenged about our human being, our relationships, our families. And so I wanted to dedicate a chapter, and I thought the last chapter made sense to talking about these. So I'm going to go through them one by one. Myth one, guilt is your conscience. It tells you when you are doing something wrong. I was thinking about this just this morning, and I say this all the time. Everybody within the sound of my voice can think of one immediately, and if they spent time and dedicated time to it, they could make a very long list of things that they and others would agree is the right thing to do that you would feel guilty for. And just using basic logic and reasoning, if that is true, if we can think of one, just one, let alone many things where we would feel guilty, and yet we know it's the right thing to do, then the word, the term, the phrase has no meaning. It ceases to become what I think what we teach and talk about it is. You've got to develop some other kind of sensibility or awareness. And we were taught to feel bad about things like taking care of ourselves. We were taught to feel bad about being ourselves, really. I share the idea, and it's true that if I were to say to you, my son, or excuse me, my brother and his wife just had a baby, and it's a really good baby, everybody within the sound of my voice would know exactly what I was talking about. I would be talking about a baby that doesn't cry or fuss or express a lot of needs, a baby that's easy. And so from birth, from the first day of life, we start telling people that they are bad if they feel and that they're good if they have few needs. And believe me, messages like that become prolific throughout our life. We've got to find a new way to understand. And to do that, we my belief, my experience is you've got to find yourself in a relationship with somebody who's an adult, somebody who isn't demonstrating their narcissistic wounding to you. And in my world, that's my therapist, Jamie Gill. It's what I try to be for the clients that I work with, for the young people that I work with. It's what I try to be with the therapist that I supervise. One of the things that I try to model and my other clinical directors model is that we make mistakes. In fact, I think being able to own up to a mistake, which is a sign of having a healthy self, being able to own up to a mistake is evidence of healing, of wholeness, of knowing that you are okay. Some people have more of that from childhood. In my experience, it's more elusive than we imagine. But if we know that we're okay, then when somebody's upset with us, we become interested in how they're feeling. We ask them to tell us more. We easily and effortlessly say that we're sorry. And what happens in relationships like that over time is people don't get stuck or they don't fixate on anger and resentment. So many parents are worried about children not forgiving them or children being angry with them or upset with them, right? Why do parents have this fear? We have this fear because we didn't get what we needed enough from our own background. So we're asking it from our child. We're asking for adoration and respect and gratitude from our child. That's not the child's job. The child's job, their primary responsibility for being human is to grow up and be a self, a full self. And if they're allowed to be a self because we have developed enough of ourself, then they don't tolerate relationships where they're not allowed to be a self. So those worries that we all have about our children getting compromised in relationships or being in toxic or unhealthy relationships, that can diminish if we've made this our project, because then our children don't tolerate people telling them not to feel, or that they're being too sensitive or overreacting or selfish or ridiculous or neurotic or anxious. They don't tolerate people telling them that they have twisted thinking. So this is myth one because it is so common. I talk about this. Brene Brown talks in her famous TED Talk about, she says in her second most popular TED Talk, she says out loud, shame is feeling bad for who you are and is associated with addiction and mental illness. And then she said guilt is feeling bad for what you did and it's associated with mental health. And she's wrong. She's simply wrong. Guilt is more neurotic, where shame is more severe. But people that do their work and heal, they don't suffer from guilt, and they have tremendous compassion and empathy for other people. They're able to say they're sorry or they're wrong. My daughter said to me the other day, my adult daughter said to me the other day, Dad, I was thinking, she said, in the religion that she had been exposed to, she said, there's no example of a divine apology. The being that we're supposed to look towards as our example never had to say they were sorry. And I thought that's a pretty insightful idea. Maybe one of the most important phrases, the most important three words in our language, I am sorry, we have no divine example of that. And our children need, and so we aspire. There's a phrase, I don't even know what the phrase means. Love means never having to say you're sorry. I actually don't even know what that means. I don't even know what they're trying to imply by that. Never understood it. Besides the fact that it's insane. Um, when we do our work, we feel more compassion, we feel more empathy, we feel less guilt. We're able to look at ourselves and see ourselves, and guilt becomes not as tremendously powerful as shame, which is a deep, deep self-loathing, a lack of acceptance, but guilt is still becomes a barrier to awareness. So love is its replacement. Awareness is its replacement. Self-forgiveness and self-compassion is its replacement. When you're compassionate toward yourself, when you're forgiving of yourself, you're able to say you're sorry to people, to make amends to people. When you're kind to yourself, you're more capable of doing the things that we think that guilt tells us to do. So obviously I'm passionate about this one, and it is so pervasive. That's why it's myth one. Myth two, it's your job to make your spouse happy and take care of all of their needs. I talk about this in the book very clearly, that this is a romantic idea. We sell it. So many of these things. This came up in our intensive this week, and somebody said out loud, and I wrote it down, that our defenses are often praised by those in our early context. Our defenses are often praised by those in our early context. Makes sense, right? Big boys don't cry. kind of thing. Um, this is another thing that is praised and aspired to in our society. And it's really the seeds, the beginning of the unraveling of most marriages. And for us and our marriage, it was a hard transition because I thought, and I grew up feeling responsible unconsciously, had no idea, could never have named it till decades later in therapy, but felt responsible for my mother's depression, my mother's anger. I acted out as a teenager and screwed up and messed up many of the same ways that your children out of Oak have messed up. And because of that, because she said she loved me and I was upsetting her and scaring her and disappointing her, I thought, like most children, that mom's feelings were my responsibility. So, of course, when I went out and looked for a spouse, why wouldn't I think that that's the same animal? Then I found a woman who struggles with anxiety, and I was talented enough to soothe her. And I made her feel safe. And when I made her feel safe, she looked at me with these really loving, grateful eyes. And I finally had solved my mother. I didn't know it. She's very different from my mother in many ways, but in this fundamental, kind of primal way, that was the relationship. And we called that exchange falling in love. And I got tired after years. I got tired of being responsible for her sadness, anxiety, fear, happiness, frustration, disappointment, and joy. And I wanted out. And we spent some time, 2 years, nearly away, and we both worked like crazy and went to an intensive by ourselves. We eventually went to a couples intensive. We did work in therapy. Um, and we came back together with an understanding that it's her job to make herself happy. And that it's my job to make myself happy. And then we come to the marriage happy and we decide, like Will Smith says, I quote him in my book, we decide to walk our separate journeys together. And we gather resources and energy to support her in where she needs to go. My job is to hold space for her. And she needs it, right? To hold space for her. So I need energy. And her job is to hold space for me. Because I'm a handful. I'm a nightmare, frankly, some days. And so she works on being happy so she can come to the marriage happy. I work on coming to the marriage happy. And that old ideas of, my everything, my better half, it's psychotic. The romantic stage, this rabid stage of love that James Hollis in the book The Eden Project talks about, this rabid stage of falling in love is a psychotic break. And it's recognizable because people that are in it don't eat, don't sleep. They cut off everybody else out of their lives, and then it feels intoxicating. And it's probably what compels us to join in many ways. But Joseph Campbell explains that marriage is not a lifelong love affair. Marriage is about sacrifice. Marriage is about transformation, and that transformation comes from private personal suffering as we shift the thinking from our childhood context to this new way of being. So my job is to be happy with her. That's my job. My job is to enjoy my wife. My job is to do what I need to do. That's one of the things that's been tough with me with the COVID situation is some of my travel. We talked about this when we got back together. We talked about this. Some of my travel was designed so that I could take care of myself. And when I would come back from a business trip after spending a night in a nice hotel in New York City and watching a show or a baseball game in Southern California where my favorite team plays, I would come back from a business trip with that extra time, and I was there for her. I was there for the children. And I haven't been able to do that, so it's been challenging. Myth 3, children should make parents proud, or children are responsible for their parents' feelings and serenity. This was a topic of conversation recently between me and some clients about this idea. This is my the word proud really loads heavily on children. And I think I figured it out for the first time. I think I figured out the reason why I think it loads heavy is because pride is a feeling that I have. It's a feeling inside here, inside of my chest. Admiring or acknowledging or praising somebody's hard work or effort or stick-to-itiveness or the accomplishment that comes out of a great deal of work, that's admiration, that's respect, that's acknowledging. But pride is something in here. I've said this, and if you want a reference, if you haven't read The Drama of the Gifted Child, and anything I say makes sense or resonates with you, spend some time, buy the drama of the gifted child, listen to the podcast that I did on it, and look at it. The virus that is present on planet Earth in every culture that I've had the privilege of working with and teaching, the virus that's present is this idea that children are supposed to take care of parents. It is not the right way that things should go. It doesn't work that way. Children need attachment, and attachment is made up of two things. They need to feel safe and secure. That's number one. And they need to feel welcomed. And what happens is because we didn't get what we need, and Alice Miller says this, then we finally have in the child what we never had in our parents, which is somebody captive that can devote their adoration to us. So when we say, I wonder if my children will forgive me, it's not their job to not forgive you. It's just not their job. It's your job to get that need taken care of somewhere else so that you can be there for them. The parent-child relationship is different than all the other ones. You occupy a place in your child's psyche that no other human being occupies. And so it's different. It has a different quality to it. Other relationships are more balanced, more give and take. There's something that's more about us being in the service of the child than vice versa. I remember when the grandparents at one point came to visit the children, our children, and they said the grandchildren aren't running up to us and aren't celebrating our arrival at the house. And my wife and I said, that's not their job. Why would they? And I think it's because the grandparents had this idea from their own childhood or watching their parents with their children. And we explained, you have to invest in them. Bring a little toy. Bring a piece of gum. Play with them. Get on the ground with them. Give them a reason to celebrate your arrival. But it's not their job to take care of you, for sure. And we made the decision. One of the decisions we made early in our marriage was we were not going to let our parents do to our children what they did to us. We just decided that. We were clear about what had happened to us just because of our parents' wounding, not because they were bad people, like every other parent, just because of their wounding. And we were not going to let them use our children for their needs. We were happy and are happy when our parents show up to be there for the grandchildren, but we weren't going to require the children to be at their disposal. So I talk about this on almost every podcast, broadcast, this myth 3 about children aren't responsible for their parents' feelings, but it's something we could revisit over and over again because it's celebrated, it's seen as an ideal. I remember I was speaking one time in a large gathering in New York, and I went after the speaker, and he said, he was the speaker before me, and he said, he was proud of the fact that he never told his father the truth about himself to protect his father from feelings that he might have. And I thought, this is going to be a tough one to follow. I cannot imagine an expressed sentiment that is a larger contrast to my teachings than anything I've ever heard. That a child needs to hide who they are, not feel, not think what they feel, to take care of mom and dad. That is the child carrying around the parent's horrible, rotten self. That is the child's protecting the parent's defense. Children are so often enlisted in protecting the parent's defense and mostly around the idea of the parent being a good parent. Myth 4, parents, friends, or partners should explain the reasons for their boundaries. I go into this in detail, and mostly what this is about is you don't have to justify. It's okay to offer an explanation when asked, but the difficult part comes is the belief that we have to justify it, that we have to be right. Right? If I explain it well enough, if I'm convincing enough in my explanation, then you won't be upset. That's the real trap in all of this. If I explain to my children my boundaries, that it's in their best interest, that I'm just looking out for them, and here's where I'm getting the research and the idea, and Dr. Reedy says, and I'm trying to make them okay with the boundary. Again, not their job to feel okay about the boundary. And there is a manipulation. Really, there's a if you know the phrase gaslighting, which is popular these days, there's a gaslighting in this idea. So as we get healthier and healthier, and it's a life's work, right? As we get healthier and healthier, we just say things like, "This is what I need. This is my boundary. I've had enough. I'm not okay with this. I'm okay with this. I need this. If you can give it, if you're willing." We start to live in a world where it's about being a self, not about being right or justified. It's like when the staff said to me in in-service last year, when somebody said, reference one of my talks and was saying, it's like Brad says, we don't call clients out on their defenses. And one of the staff raised their hand, and I thought it was a great question. He said, but isn't it helpful to point out the justifying? And I thought about it, and I thought, almost never do I call out justifying. And that's just one defense of many. What I do is I operate in such a way that the client doesn't feel the need to justify. There's no need for the defense. I operate in such a way to create a safe environment where they don't have to prove themselves to me. That's the goal, right? That's the long-term goal in therapy. Even in the intensives we do, and we set up a really safe container with guidelines, people show up because it's safe. They say things, they show things that they don't normally show because it's a different kind of container. So gently, I can invite people into this idea that you might be, I'm wondering if there's something you're avoiding or if you feel like you need to prove something to me. But I don't need that. It's okay. I remember I had a boy that I went and worked with. I was working with a therapist, and I was taking over the case, and I was in the first session, and he was qualifying his feelings with sentence after sentence after sentence. He's saying, I'm not being a victim. I know my mother and father have a right to set boundaries, and he kept on saying all these things. And he was getting to the feeling, but he had to make sure, he had to lay down all of these rules so that we couldn't attack him, right? He was ready for the attack. And I stopped him and I said, I'll call his name Austin. I said, Austin, you don't have to do that. It's okay. We'll just listen to the feeling. And he just burst into tears for a long time. And it didn't go away immediately, but week after week, I just said, you're just allowed to feel what you feel. You're allowed to like what you like, to hate what you hate, to love what you love. And you don't have to justify it. Not here. It didn't take away from my boundaries. There was never a question in Austin's mind whether or not Brad had a boundary. There was never a question about kind of, accountability. But he didn't have to justify or explain his feelings. And that's similar to boundaries. when we get into this work, we learn, and we usually learn by being in a context where it's safe. We learn that it's just okay to be us, to have a limit. Myth 5, I know what is best for others. I'm going to say this as clear as I can in the way that it was taught to me. You don't know other people's truth. And that's hard for parents. It's hard enough knowing your own truth. My boundaries as a parent don't come from me asserting or knowing that I know exactly the path that my four very unique, very different children have. My boundaries come from what I feel comfortable and okay with, tolerating and allowing in my life, what I'm willing and not willing to support in their life, based on how I feel comfortable. It's a subtle but important distinction. And if I get too, there's a quote in the new book that says something like, I play this game once in a while where I imagine that I don't know what other people, what their past should look like. And if I play that game long enough, I start to believe it. I have parents tell me, I've had this told to me many times, only with people that work with me for a period of years. But I've had people tell me that when you first told me, Brad, that you try not to have an opinion about your children's life course, I thought you were crazy. I thought, not only was I thought that, did I think that was insane, I actually thought that was a primary responsibility of a parent or a father or a mother. And I said, yeah, it makes sense. But you know what? I'm so glad that's not true for my mother and father and me. I'm so glad. I'm so glad that I didn't live their life, that I was allowed to live my own. I'm so glad. I want my children to go farther than I went. And for them to go farther than I went, it's going to be uncomfortable. I get to have boundaries. And that's the thing that everybody gets confused by. I get to have boundaries. I get to say no and yes. I get better at saying no and yes. But I don't know. I don't know what you need. And the strange thing that comes from this is that most of the important lessons and wisdom that I have, to be really honest, have come from my mistakes and missteps and detours, have come from the tragedies that I've worked through. And so, just in that idea, I couldn't be trusted to design the perfect life for you. We shouldn't, myth number 6, we shouldn't need someone else to validate us. Self-esteem is an inside job. This really boils me. I don't know another way. I've heard stories of other ways. Meditation, people tell me, is one way that they have this experience of self-love, self-compassion. I only know that we are wounded in relationships and we heal in relationships. And it wasn't until I found somebody, an empathic, capable other, and sat with them long enough and talked to them long enough where they didn't abandon me and didn't become impatient and didn't graduate me and didn't get frustrated, that I started to consider that I might be okay. Jessica Benjamin, she wrote The Bonds of Love. She's an attachment theorist. She said that it is only through another person that we can find the self. That when somebody sees us, truly sees us, we have the experience of, there I am. And the cool thing about this seeing thing is it's not seeing your talents and your gifts and your strengths. Those are great and important. That's the easy part. It's seeing all of you. And that's why I encourage parents to hold lightly the struggles, the valleys, the detours. Hold them lightly. Because this task of becoming a person and becoming a self is messy. So the key is to find somebody who can see all of us, somebody that just won't validate the strengths and the successes, but understands with compassion and non-judgment the darkness, the thing that we call darkness, the thing that we were told was unacceptable, was unlovable, what was bad, was wrong. And so when we find somebody who can see and love all of us, we have the experience that we're okay. And then we can be a person. And then we can say, I'm sorry when we make a mistake. And then we can admit to our faults because they're not so threatening. That's why I can't find, Alice Miller says it in the book, Drama of the Gifted Child, that there is no substitute for therapy. No book is a substitute. And that to cut, she says, to cut the tragic link between admiration and love, we must go to therapy to experience a capable, empathic other, to know that all of us is okay, even the parts that we were told were not okay. Myth 7, intimacy is warm and fuzzy. This is from marriage. I hear couples say all the time, they just want to hear what people think. They just want to hear the truth. They just want people to speak their truth. The wife says to the husband, I just want to know how you feel. The husband says to the wife, I just want to know how you feel. My mother said to me this last summer, I just want to know how you feel. And my response is, are you sure? Are you sure? Because knowing how I feel might not be warm and fuzzy, because sometimes it's angry and hurt and frustrated and sad. I talk about this all the time. You know, there's so much in pop psychology these days that speaking one's truth is vulnerability. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. But it gets so much of the good press, right? Telling the truth about how you feel and what you think. That's something for sure. I'll say that in one of the other myths. But the fact of the matter is, the real difficult thing is the listening. That's the gold, listening. So intimacy is the exchange of between two people, and the hardest part is hearing somebody's truth. And it's going to be painful. You know, I talk about this all the time. When my wife and I, or I, have a difficult feeling that we're feeling about the other, or even about life, but about the other. And if I go to her and I tell her my truth, and she listens really well, I feel affectionate. I want to be intimate with her. I feel I just got taken care of. She doesn't always feel that way right after that. She feels a little bit like, hey, that was hard. That was heavy. And when I'm on that side of the equation, I feel the same way. Talking tends to be a taking thing in intimacy. And listening is a giving thing. And that's why the listener, the receiver of the tough thing, often feels a little bit more distant. So it's more complicated. It's scary. It's terrifying. It confronts all of our narcissistic wounds. Those parts of us that weren't seen, weren't acknowledged as children. Myth 8, intimacy is a measure of your ability to share your vulnerable, authentic truth. That goes right with the last one that I was just describing. It's only, I say in the book, this is not untrue. Part of intimacy is a measure of your ability to share your vulnerable, authentic truth. But it's not the entire equation. And I think the thing that deserves more of the spotlight than we give it in our pop psychology literature and our TED Talks is listening. And we're not great at it. We're not great at it in general. It is a rare person that can respond with safe responses like, thank you for telling me. I'm glad you're talking about it. I remember when I was at my intensive, you're not supposed to, at the intensive I went to, you're not allowed to tell what you do for a living, but there was a sense of what I did based on my participation. And one of my peers came up to me and she said, my adult son tells me he doesn't trust me. And I've had this question asked of me many times. She said, how do I make him trust me? How do I get that trust? I said, well, let's start off with this. When he tells you that he doesn't trust you, tell him, thank you for telling me that. I'm glad you're talking. I want to understand it. I want to be safe. And I get a sense that maybe I haven't been in the past, and I'm sorry. I probably have been reactive to that and tried to talk you into trusting me instead of listening to why you don't trust me. And the woman looked at me like, that makes total sense, but that was not my impulse. So we learn what I think is the taller hill to climb into intimacy is hearing. And it is based on the development of ourselves, how much we have either healed our narcissistic wounding or not been narcissistically wounded in the first place, which is a rare part of the equation. Myth 9, tools and boundaries are for changing other people. Parent education is for changing parents. The journey of the heroic parent, there's actually a review on there. It's so annoying when you get reviews because this one person wrote a review and they said, this book, it gave me a 1-star review on Amazon and said, this book is a farce because all it is to give parents that are feeling guilty an excuse, an out to alleviate their guilt. And I'm thinking to myself, you must not have read a page of this book because that's exactly the opposite. It's to help parents realize that they're the project. And when parents transform, when they heal, it's way better for the kid. It's way better when you first and foremost shift the project to you, which, by the way, probably comes out of healing in the first place. But when you shift the project to you, it's a huge burden off the kid's shoulders. Somebody asked me, I talk about this. Somebody asked me years ago about my boundaries, how good they were. And I was stumbling because it depends on the situation, the circumstances, the relationship. I'm good in some areas and on some days, and I'm bad in some areas and on some days. So I was searching for an answer, and my friend said, let me make it more clear. If a client called you on Sunday, would you make sure not to answer the call to teach them that you're not available on Sunday? And I said, well, I said, I think I understand your question now. I said, I don't not answer the phone on Sunday to teach them something. I don't answer on Sunday because I can't. And if I can, I do. Boundaries do teach, do impact. It's probably the number one vehicle for teaching our children what it means to live with another person. It's probably the biggest tool for teaching our children about empathy because they have to live with an other when we have boundaries. When we show up as a self, as a person in our relationships with boundaries, which is a task, right? Then people have to deal with an other person, and our children have to deal with an other person. Part of the reason that some of our children struggle with empathy, with being entitled, or having this kind of narcissistic mentality go way beyond early childhood is because we don't have a self. We think we're supposed to be, we aspire to be selfless. We believe in the insane adage that we would do anything for our children, like that's even possible. And like that's even something to aspire to, right? Your children need a self. They need a boundaried person. And when you're a boundaried person, they have to live with somebody. And then they know the world is made up of others, of people. And I have to figure out how to deal with that because I grew up with these two others in my house. And they were big others. They were always there, having needs and limits and boundaries. And I had to deal with my feelings around that. So I'm going to have to figure out how to be with others. So tools and boundaries are for changing you. Even the behavioral contract, I talk about this all the time. The behavioral contract, it's almost our clinical director from intensives program, Travis Slagle, said, it's like it's this thing that we just keep doing. It's obligatory, he said. The behavioral contract is a tool for you. It would be just as effective if the kid never signed it or read it. If you just told them it. No child in the history of behavioral contracts has ever had a contract, violated the rules, been shown that he violated or she violated the rules, read them, and said to the parent, you know what, you're right. I see right here, I've simply violated Rule 3, and the associated consequences is something I own. No kid's ever done that. What it's supposed to do is it's supposed to give the parent the confidence that they've been clear. It's supposed to erase the parent's self-doubt. And besides, if a child signs a behavioral contract while at a voc, they're going to rightly point out that they signed it under duress because it was a qualification for coming home. You don't get away with that in the world, leveraging somebody to sign a contract with the possible consequence of not getting to come home, right? So I'm getting a little astray, but tools and boundaries are for changing us. Myth 10. It is my duty to give advice to those I love, including children, parents, including children, partners, and close friends. I just don't like to be around people who give advice. I don't have the stomach for it. I don't have, I don't keep a close personal circle with people who think they know my truth and are inclined to give it to me. And I don't give it to my children. Even if they ask for it, I have a 27 and a 25-year-old, an 18 and a 12-year-old. And my 27 and 25-year-old are successful in most ways that people would measure success. They're moral, wonderful, compassionate, caring people who want to give gifts to the world and are both finishing a graduate degree right now. One graduating this semester, one next year. My 18-year-old is going off to the college of his choice in New York. We finally signed up and we're crossing our fingers that it'll be open and it won't be online next year. And he wants to help transgender, non-binary people find a more inclusive experience in gaming, and he wants to write gaming and write game code in gaming. My 12-year-old wants to be a therapist. None of this has come from lectures. I don't. Even my adult children, when they call me, and once in a while they'll call me and say, "I have a question. Will you tell me?" And I don't know what you should do. I barely know what I should do. I don't even know what the word should means, actually. I literally do not know what the word should means. It doesn't make sense to me. So I say, here's what's worked for me in a similar area, but I don't know. And in fact, sometimes they complain that I'm too non-directive with them. But I can't not be that person. I just don't know. I'll try to hear them and reflect back what I'm hearing them say. If I can reflect back what the truth that I'm hearing you say between the lines, that I can be helpful. But advice for me is probably the most obvious example of judgment. It's probably for me the most overt example of a lack of safety in a relationship. It's somebody's anxiety and somebody's neuroses to give advice. What works for me, or you might try this, or I found this to be helpful. Maybe it'll work for you. That's different. But you should or you shouldn't. Doesn't make sense for me. Stopped making sense a long time ago. Myth 11. The entitlement and narcissism of kids today stems from permissive parenting. Again, there's a tiny bit of truth in this, but really it stems from not being seen. And what not being seen comes from is a parent not having a self. That's kind of the order of things. Our lack of selves as parents prevent our ability to see our children, and permissive parenting comes out of that. Our children then become mirrors for us. They become something, Alice Miller says it, they become something that we try to get something from them that we should have gotten from our parents. And so our permissiveness is about a lack of a boundary, which is evidence of a lack of self, which is evidence of a narcissistic wound in us that's unhealed. Because we were raised by narcissistically wounded people, we tend to raise them. Right? An adult parent, a healed parent, when a child gets upset, they say, "Thanks for telling me. Tell me more. I'm glad you're talking about it." A wounded parent says, "You're overreacting. You're being silly. You're being dramatic. That's just your anxiety. You misunderstand me. Don't be a victim. And all of that is just a mask. It's a mask for the defense. It is the defense. So narcissism and the worst part about narcissism, it's it's so insidious, is when you meet somebody that's again, narcissism is a diagnosis. Narcissistic wounding is just a gradation of it, just a part of it. It doesn't qualify necessarily for the diagnosis of being a narcissist, which is more rare. Narcissistic wounding is the common cold. And narcissism is a rare disease. It's solidified. It's ingrained. The pattern is set. So if we had to take care of our parents because they needed to be good, and so we needed to protect them and be enlisted in that, then we go to our children and ask them to give to us what our parents couldn't. And the cycle continues until we find a therapist, we find a context to heal, and then the child gets to be a child and the parent becomes the adult. That's where narcissism and entitlement comes from. The unhealed narcissistic wounding of a parent. Oh, I was saying, I got off track. The insidious part about treating narcissism, when you meet somebody that's a narcissist, classically, what's your instinct? Your instinct is to knock them down to size. That's what behavior, what countertransference narcissism provokes, even narcissistic children, which is a little bit of a strange thing to say because it's not exactly accurate, but children displaying really narcissistic behaviors, entitled behaviors. We want to put them in their place, right? Knock them down to size. When really the antidote for narcissism is resonance, seeing, understanding, listening, boundaried, but seeing, understanding, and listening. So it's kind of a hard one because even therapists sometimes will be inclined to react in such a way as to, excuse me, even therapists will be inclined to react in such a way to perpetuate the narcissistic presentation. Myth 12. I would do anything for my kids or the people I love. It's insane. It's impossible. It makes the person who has hurt, upset, sad, frustrated, disappointed feelings, it makes them the problem. Because if I am an angel, if I am perfect like this, then anything you feel except gratitude and joy and love for me means that something in you is broken. I was just saying to somebody today, I can't imagine saying this to a child. And if it were said to me, it would be so off-putting, so unrealistic. All that is the wound of needing to believe in the fantasy of being the good one. It's not even an ideal to aspire to, because then you're not a self. Selfless is not the goal. And selfish is not necessarily a bad word. We've turned it into something bad. It has the definition and connotation, but being a self is having a limit, you know? Being unavailable to the people that you love because you're taking care of yourself isn't a capital crime. It doesn't ruin people. It's okay. It's one of the gifts I had in growing up with a single mother. There were a lot of liabilities growing up with a single mother, but one of the gifts that I had is that she had to work. She had to do everything. Father, mother, provide. So I had to figure it out. I had to deal with frustration tolerance and delay of gratification. I had to sort it out and move through it. And I learned it was okay to take care of myself. Still becomes a struggle at times, but I got a sense that it was okay. So when I wrote this a reporter reached out, and I've told the story before, but I thought it was funny. They reached out and they said, we're contacting experts about things not, we're going to make a list, they said, of things not to say to our children. So will you give us two? So I wrote a list of 20. This was the first one on my list. I didn't think about it anymore. Months went by. I was flipping through social media and I saw this Red Book magazine that said 50 things not to say to your children. And I thought, oh, I did something like that one time. I didn't know the reporter was from Red Book magazine online. And I clicked on it. Number one was, I would do anything for the kid, for my kids. It's 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 a it's a notion that is insane, and it puts much more burden on the children than we imagine. I'll go through the three keys of enlightenment. Enlightenment is more about unlearning and undoing. We must be willing, like the serpent, to shed the skin of our understanding and grow. It's an idea I adapted from Joseph Campbell. I'm not saying that I'm enlightened or no, but I know what to look for, know what to look at, I know what to walk towards. The first key is learn to be okay with being wrong and get really good at losing. It's the key to becoming a person. When the goal shifts from being right and winning to just being you, you're free. You're free. You can be you, you can have boundaries. People that love you can be upset with you. In therapy, I teach this with the therapist all the time. Like, get good at losing. Some of the biggest struggles that therapists will get into their clients, they want to win. And what winning looks like is, I want to be the good therapist. I want to fix you. I want to cure you. I want to be helpful. And the kid is saying, I'm going to make you fail. Every idea that you give me that you think is a good one, I'm going to shoot down so you feel just like I feel, hopeless and powerless and stuck. I said to a therapist just this week, it's good that you don't know the answer. It's good that you don't have the answer for your client. It will make her feel safe. It'll make her feel validated. It'll make her not feel crazy that it was so easy for you to figure out. So you might want to sit with not knowing for a while. Key two, come to know your darkness and remain on speaking terms with your mental illness. Strong words. Remain on speaking terms with your mental illness. But it's the key to becoming a person, becoming enlightened, becoming free. When you realize that you have a mental illness, people think of mental illness as a binary, right? There's either this one pile over here, which is mentally healthy people, or there's this one pile over here, which is mentally ill people. That's not true. It's a continuum, and we're all on it somewhere. And so just know what yours is. Know where your wounds are. Know where your triggers are. Why are you in these same kind of relationships? Why are you escalated in this moment? In Al-Anon, they say if it's hysterical, it's historical. And what they're saying is learn about your wounds. Learn how you protect them. It shows up in your marriage. It shows up in your parenting. It shows up in being a citizen, a friend, an employee, an employer. This is freedom. This is freedom. This is what being a good parent is. To know your darkness and get on and remain on speaking terms with your mental illness. That is being a good parent. Not being right or having the answers, but saying, yeah, I'm a handful. I'm tough to handle sometimes. The last one, key three, learn how to die again and again. Let go of old context, beliefs, and relationships. We have to be willing to let go of the ideas. We have to be willing to evolve in order to grow. When Campbell said the snake, Nietzsche said, and Campbell talked about it later, the snake that does not shed its skin will die. Life is a series of learning new things, right? If you arrive, you're dead. People that don't go to therapy, I think sometimes, when they know it's available to them, I think they think that they've figured it out. It's a dangerous place to be. Keep learning. And learning means that old ideas are going to get old. The podcasts I did 2 years ago aren't the podcasts I do today. And the podcasts I do a year from now aren't going to be the podcasts I'm doing today. My third book won't be my first book. Right? We're learning, we're growing, we're becoming. I'll take one or two. I'll take two questions. Whoop. Here's a long one. Someone writes in, I struggle with your example of children not being responsible for grandparents. I remember needing to line up with my siblings at 9 a.m. every Sunday morning to say hello to my grandparents at the time. As a child, I hated it, but in retrospect, I admire my parents for the respect we were taught and how we were raised with respect for our parents and grandparents. My parents had boundaries which were very heavy on respect of our elders and others. We would have been by the door waiting for our grandparents to greet them and expected to bring them refreshments. So what is the cutoff for the fine line between responsible for their feelings and showing respect? I can understand why it would be a struggle for you. It makes sense growing up in that context. I don't have grandchildren yet. I have children, 4. All I can tell you is I won't demand it. That's all I can tell you. I would not want them to line up for me. That's all I can tell you. I will get the respect I deserve, I think. It's just a different way of thinking. It's you grew up in what researchers call a strict father family. I know it's gendered, but that's what the research calls it. Strict parent, or in the preface of my book, Jamie Gill calls it a strict father family. My children respect me. On my weak moments, on my moments when I feel most vulnerable, I tell my children to respect me. On my stronger moments, my more enlightened moments, I tell my children, thank you for talking to me. Even though it was a little bit sloppy, I appreciate it. Sorry I didn't hear you when you said it gently. So it's a different way of thinking about relationships. And my relationship with my children, my 4 children, I treasure it so much. I love them. I respect them. They love me. They want to be around me. But I don't think I've ever told them that they need to respect me in my entire life, except for when I'm feeling really crappy and I'm feeling defensive. But as a rule, that's not. And they love me. They want to be around me. They ask me for advice. They look up to me, and I've never asked them to respect me. It just doesn't occur to me. And when my daughter, if you read the second book, when she stood up to my mother the last 4th of July and said to my mother, it's okay for you to have boundaries, but it's not okay for you to shame us. I couldn't have been happier for my daughter to not take the abuse from my mother. So it's a different way of thinking. And all I can tell you is keep doing the work and see if it comes up, see how it comes out for you. Last question. Can your child feel seen even if you didn't feel you have a solidified sense of your own self? It's probably a pretty good correlation. Your ability to see. Jamie Gill wrote a book called Seeing and Intimacy in Psychotherapy. And it's a pretty good predictor. Your sense of self predicts your ability. Actually, the research shows this. I'm stepping lightly. The extent of your ability to see somebody is founded on, settles on, rests on your sense of self. We know 2 things in attachment research. Attachment is the number 1 thing that contributes to the well-being of a child, and the ability to provide a healthy attachment is based on the understanding you've made out of your own childhood. That's the number 1 predictor. So in other words, how you've made sense out of yourself, how you've come to understand yourself, come to know yourself. And if you want a reference, read Daniel Siegel and Mary Hartzell's book, Parenting from the Inside Out. And there's plenty of evidence-based research. And the research is global, and it's replicated over and over and over again. I go to attachment conferences and read attachment literature, and it's the same stuff over and over again. Every culture, inner cities, Europe, Asia, Africa, attachment. And it looks different on its surface, but attachment is the predictor, and a parent's sense of self is the best predictor of attachment. All right. Like I said at the beginning, if you want to do a deep dive, we have I believe one space list. It might have been filled. So intensives at evoketherapy.com. We have 1 space. It's Friday afternoon. I think it's 3 to 6 on Friday, and then 9 to 6:30-ish and 9 to 6:30-ish on Saturday and Sunday. You can do it from the comfort of your own home. Online, it's cheaper than our in-person ones, and it's a little bit shorter, so you can do it over a weekend. The next one is May 15th, and the one after that is June 5th. Contact intensives@evoketherapy.com. Next, parent support groups, Thursday, that's dated, Thursday, May 21st at 6 p.m. Mountain Time, or for an intensive, if you're an intensive participant, Wednesday, May 27th at 6 p.m. Mountain Time. Contact Malia@evoketherapy.com for more information. We ask all current parents to go to got the hiccups, 6 12-step support groups. Any combination of Al-Anon, CODA, Families Anonymous, adult children. Alateen is for teenagers. Refuge Recovery is a support group that's Buddhist inspired, doesn't have an emphasis on a higher power. And the National Alliance on Mental Illness, NAMI.org, is a great place to go to get free resources and information and classes in your area, in your local area. Follow us on social media. These broadcasts are all available on the podcast app, Finding You and Evoke Therapy Podcast, any podcast app. Or you can go to soundcloud.com on your computer to listen to them there. On Twitter and Instagram, you can find Evoke Therapy using the handle @EvokeTherapy. You can also find our intensive program on Instagram using @EvokeTherapy Intensives. On Facebook, you can find us by searching Evoke Therapy Programs. Oh, by the way, the foundation is about to go kaput. So if you're interested, if you want to save it, it's an organization that has helped many people go through, but the board is ready to change over, and we need new board members. So email Malia@evoketherapy.com. Malia doesn't know that until just now, but email Malia@evoketherapy.com if you're interested. The board is on its last legs, and we're getting people still wanting to donate money. So we would love to continue it. We can't carry it internally. It has to be an outside thing. So if you have any interest in fundraising and supporting people who can't afford therapy, if you want to give back, please email Malia@evoketherapy.com. You can find the foundation on Facebook by searching Evoke Family Foundation. And of course, you can go to the Evoke Therapy blog. Both of my books are available on Amazon. The Journey of the Heroic Parent and The Audacity to Be You are both available on Amazon.com. The audio version of The Audacity to Be You should be out. We're waiting for it to be edited. I'm also waiting for Jamie to be able to read the foreword, because I don't want my voice on the foreword. I wanted hers, but COVID is kind of delaying that. So we're getting it out as quickly as we can. We'll let you know in the next couple of days about the next broadcast. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for and in behalf of your child, for the work, for showing up, for being interested in learning and growing, for considering something new. Somebody says, I've learned that respect is earned, not forced. Respect is the fruit of mutual respectful relationship. Somebody else says, excellent broadcast. Really what I needed right now. It's a new season with my son. It's good, but provoking some anxiety. Continuing my work, very important right now. I have all the respect in the world for you folks who do this work, who show up, who get curious about their contribution to this process. So take care. I'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye.